You should see me out in France, wearing my tin hat. Mid-shot and shell, it's worse than, well, it's even worse than that. Now imagine me in the Maginot Line, sitting on a mine in the
Hello everyone, Phil Travis here. We are inside one of the major fortresses of the Maginot Line in France, in Alsace-Lorraine, on the border with Germany, or Deutschland. Here, this fortress was built to prevent a potential German invasion between World War I and World War II. And we are here about 20 meters underground in this fortress. It is massive. You can see how long it is. Down here in the ground, you can see the rail lines where they used to move equipment and goods. Soldiers lived in here. This fort had 24 officers and 600 men that would have been stationed in this fort. Now we're on a tour guide here, so I don't want to take too long, but I just wanted to give you a feel for what it looks like in here. When we get outside, I'll show you the outside of it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. And if my beautiful camera lady Jennifer would just kind of pan around and show us this area here. You can see, if you look here, well, you can't see it here, but there's air filtration systems, there's all kinds of methods to prevent gas from being launched inside the facility. Again, we're talking about walls that are 2 to 3 meters thick, and here, it's quite cold here, and we're upwards of 20 to 30 meters below the ground. And this is just part of it. It's a massive facility, as you can see. We're still in the Maginot Line, and this is one of the main cannons that is above us on top of the surface. Now, these cannons were designed to go up and down. So it has a round top up top that hides the actual cannons themselves. And so they used this, if an attack was coming, then they would use the command centers and telephone rooms to warn, and the soldiers would then raise the cannon by using this here. This is 90 tons. 90 tons. It's an incredibly heavy piece of equipment. And the artillery is below us several stories below us. And they would bring that up through a lift, and the soldiers would then take the shells. They would load the shells below, and then they would use the cannon here to lift the cannon, and then it could be targeted from a periscope that's also below us. All down here, in just a second, Jennifer will show you down here after I demonstrate this. Down here is water for the troops bathrooms, sleeping areas, and so forth. But I want to show you, this is all functioning, this is all original, and I want you to watch as this moves, and we'll also move the turret up above the ground. So you take this handle here, you move it like this, and if you look up there, you can see it moving. And it's actually quite easy, given the fact that it weighs 90 tons. So you bring it up like this, and this would be how you would lower the cannon. And you can see it coming down. So it's coming down, it's lowered, and now if you want it to go back up, you can go back the other way. Go back this way. And again, you can see this cylinder up here is showing you this move. And this, again, is 90 tons, built in the late 20s, 1930s. So come this way momentarily, come this way. And here, this would be the soldiers' quarters. You have in here the sleeping quarters, the toilet, and water for the soldiers. And this demonstrates what's happening here. So you look here, this is the mechanism we just raised. The cannon is up here, you see it right there. It goes all the way up, and it can move 360 degrees around. And of course, below they have periscopes that allow them to see approaching soldiers. So a soldier in here would not have to be facing a soldier individually themselves, but would be greatly protected. And you can see here, it's closed. Here, it's open. And this is water, because you need to survive. That's it. All right, we'll go outside in a little bit. We'll talk more. Okay, so we're still at the cannon, at the Maginot Line. It's much hotter here. When we were down below, it was very cold. It was very cold, and now it's warmer because we're only about 4 meters below the surface. And so this is really, you look up there, you can actually see the top of the cannon turret. And two soldiers, this area right here, two soldiers will operate this, and they're really operating the cannon more directly. Here's an example of the type of munition. Here's an example of the kind of munition that they would be loaded. And these munitions, of course, would be brought up from the basement, from the downstairs, using that elevator. And they would be from here. You put them here, and this is how it would turn, and the cannon goes up through there. And when they bring it up, the cannon will go, the ammunition will go right in here, like this. So that's where it would sit. Now to move it, I think I can do this. It's actually kind of amazing how it's not that difficult to turn this. The turret can move 360 degrees, and so you can, see? And you can see this massive piece of equipment turning and moving. So it took several soldiers to work this, but it's actually relatively easy given the scale of this equipment. So when we get outside, I keep on saying that, when we get outside, we'll talk more about Maginot Line on the outside, but I wanted to give you a feel for what it looked like on the inside and what the internal workings were. All right, so here we are outside of one of the moderate-sized Maginot Line fortresses. This particular portion of the Maginot Line is located near the village of Limbach, France. We're in Alsace, northern Alsace, right on the border with Germany. And I want to say, first of all, you see this structure here and you're like, oh, this isn't that much. And there's another, you can't see it, but down the hill there's another sort of concrete entranceway down the hill. And you might look at this and say, oh, the Maginot Line, it's just a machine gun bunker. I assure you, it is not. Underneath, this goes underneath the ground, but it's very much a subterranean sort of world down there. It gets very cold as you go deep into the earth. And that's not just under this. So this is just one part, and this connects to six different cannon installations. The Maginot Line was built by the French after World War I. They began construction in 1928. This particular Maginot Line fort, which housed 24 officers and upwards of 1,600 soldiers, was first completed and occupied by soldiers in 1937. The whole point of the Maginot Line, which there are Maginot Line installations that stretch from the northern coast by Belgium all the way down to the southern coast, but the biggest and most robust portions of these installations are here in Alsace, on the border between France and Germany, as this was considered the most likely point that a German invasion would come. So this was built between 1928 and completed in the 30s, different installations completed at different times, and the whole point was to stave off a potential German invasion, which during the 1930s became increasingly likely as you saw the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. Germany began to militarize and rearm, and very much war seemed to become an ever-present reality by the late 30s. The Maginot Line, however, is one of these interesting sort of artifacts of history, of military history, because the Maginot Line really, in practical senses, it never served its purpose. And really, you might argue that it's kind of a big waste of money, because when the Germans ultimately invaded France in 1940, in the spring of 1940, they simply went around the Maginot Line. The French had not built up the defensive installations along the border with the Ardennes forest, which is primarily in southern Belgium. They assumed that the region was impassable because of the mountainous and forested region. And if my camera lady, my beautiful camera lady Jennifer, will kind of swing around, you'll see that this area too is somewhat mountainous, but the Ardennes forest was considered to be impassable. And the Ardennes forest is just to the north. This is the Vosges forest, the Vosges mountains, And the Ardennes force was considered by the French to be impassable. And so they did not build up the installations in the Ardennes. Well, what ultimately happened when the invasion of France occurred in the spring of 1940 is the French positioned all of their forces up into Belgium, in northern Belgium, not in the Ardennes, to stop where they thought the German invasion would come. And then they weren't worried about this area because it was protected by the Maginot Line. Well, as history would tell, of course, Hitler and the Nazis, the German Wehrmacht, went through the Ardennes forest. There were some passages there, corridors there, where they could get their heavy artillery and tanks through. And of course, the Nazis Germany moved through the Ardennes forest. They bypassed the Maginot Line. They got behind all of the French and British Expeditionary Force troops that were up in northern Belgium, and they encircled them. This eventually, of course, led to the famed Dunkirk evacuation, in which the British Expeditionary Force was saved in an ad hoc amphibious evacuation in 1940. This position on the Maginot Line was not attacked until 5 days after the French capitulated to the German army. So after the Germans had really defeated the vast majority of the French army and they were behind the Maginot Line, they ultimately assaulted the Maginot Line from the other side, from the rear, from the French side. And it held out. This fort held out for 5 days. It was first attacked by German Stuka dive bombers, and it held out for 5 days until the French capitulation. But it never served the purpose of being the defensive bulwark that would prevent a German invasion and a German conquest of France that they had hoped it would be. From that standpoint, it was largely a waste. It falls into maybe the category of one of the great blunders of military history, having dumped an incredible amount of money into building these just elaborate and incredible subterranean defensive networks with incredibly high-tech weaponry, only to be bypassed by the German blitzkrieg. Now, if we come closer here, you can look that attacking this fort would be an incredibly formidable thing. Here you see, right here, these two depressions in the front. These two depressions are machine guns, and as you look at the machine guns, you can see that how they're set up is in such a way that the operator of the machine gun would be impossible to kill. The little kind of point in the middle of that indention is a machine gun, and if Jennifer will pan over to her right, you will see that you have, or her right. You'll see that there's a couple more there. Now, when you go inside here, so this, the opening entrance. When you go inside here, the first thing you see is another one of these machine guns. And then you go around the corner, there's another machine gun. So if a Wehrmacht army unit assaulted this directly, they would meet certain death, almost undoubtedly. So it's an incredibly formidable defensive installation. And it has several cannons. In this case, this installation has 6 different cannons spread out over a wide area that are above the ground and are protected. They have a dome top that would sit down, and they have a mechanism that would raise it, and a periscope to see the enemy, and command center telephone communication networks to communicate where the enemy was. And they would raise and lower these, and really protecting their guns and protecting the fort from any consequential assault. But again, the story that is told, of course, is that the Maginot Line was largely useless. The Germans simply went around it and simply avoided the tremendous defensive installations that are found here and below the earth here, 25 meters below the earth. They just simply went around it, and they simply avoided it, and they didn't have to deal with the tremendous strength that this installation represents. Everything that you see here, and when I show you the videos from the inside, everything you see there is all original. It's all original. So it's really kind of stood the test of time, and I'm sure it will be here for a long, long time, this elaborate subterranean defensive network, the Maginot Line, built by the French between World War I and World War II, largely to defend against what seemed to be an inevitable coming German invasion.
You should be out in France wearing my tin hat. shot and shell, it's worse than, well, it's even worse than that. Now imagine me in the Maginot Line, sitting on a mine in the Maginot Line. Now it's turned out nice again, the army life is fine. French girls make a fuss of me. I'm not French if you can see, but I know what they mean when they say wee wee down on the Maginot Line. Now imagine me in the Maginot Line, sitting on the mine in the Maginot Line. Now it's turned out nice again, the army life is fine. The enemy we had to chase, but my gun got out of place. I went and shot the colonel in the face, down on the Maginot Line. Sitting on the mine in the Maginot Line. Now it's turned out nice again, the army life is fine. At night myself